Good morning, gentlemen. Today I'm going to talk to you about Ukraine. I haven't made a video on Ukraine for quite some time, and many people have asked me what's happening on the Ukraine front. Where is the war going? Well, gentlemen, let me tell you that the war is over 1 year and 3 months old now, and there's no sign that it's going to end. Why? Because the Anglo-Saxon powers and the European powers are so mortally scared of Russian victory in Ukraine that they will do anything to keep the pot boiling, that is Ukraine fighting on. And of course, the Russians have not given up anywhere, as they are on the ascendant. But there's a point here, they are not winning. They are nowhere close to overrunning the whole of Ukraine. So that's a drawback of the Russian army, and the actual fact is that that city of Bakhmut has not yet been taken over by the Russians despite tremendous bombardment and assault. The Wagner group, which is a mercenary group fighting on the side of Russia, has claimed certain portions of the city, and so have the Russians, but the city has not been subdued. At the same time, the Ukrainians have been suffering tremendous casualties as per my reports, and they are not able to move forward. I wonder if Zelensky had watched the press conference of the American chiefs of staff when he was asked a question, will the Ukrainian army aided by NATO be able to throw the Russians out of Ukraine? His answer was, it is improbable. And that is what really matters. The Russians have seized about 28% of Ukrainian territory and they are consolidating it. But then that doesn't again mean that they have won the war. But gentlemen, the signs are very, very ominous. The Russians have yesterday reacted to the French, who had earlier expelled some Russian diplomats, and they have given tit for tat, and 20 French diplomats were declared persona non grata and expelled from Russia. Now the question is, what is going to happen next? It's $1 million question, but the answer is very simple. And that simple is that inch by inch, Europe is moving closer and closer to destruction. I hope the Europeans can see what's happening. Macron made a visit to China. He thought he's a very influential man and the Chinese will listen to him, because he explained to the Chinese to ask the Russians to be reasonable. He says, tell them to stop fighting. Wonderful. I like the idea. But I wish he had made the same effort of the Americans. It is the Americans which are fueling the fire in Ukraine. And historically, I have already pointed out to you that it was the American plan to declare Russia as an enemy so that they could beef up NATO, and at the same time their hegemony would remain for the next 100 years. But everything is not cut and dried the way the American leadership may think, because they were confronted by a Russia which faced an existentialist threat to its existence, and the invasion of Ukraine was on the cards. The Americans and the Europeans and the NATO were always sure that Russia will not invade Ukraine come what may. Why? Because they were thinking that Article 4 of the NATO Charter says that an attack on any European country would be an attack on Europe. That's easily said on paper, but practically it doesn't work. That is the crux of the issue. The Americans miscalculated badly, and the Russians were even worse. They could have easily overrun Ukraine 8 to 9 months back if they had put in all the arsenal and the weaponry which they are using now at that time. They didn't do it. And the net result is that the war is lingering on. The Russians control the skies. Yes, they are bombing They've destroyed Ukraine. There is no doubt about it. Ukraine is not going to recover for the next 50 years. And I wonder if the Ukrainians really realize that they're being used as cannon fodder by the Americans and the British in their fight with Russia. They are fighting a proxy war on part of America and England. At the same time, they are the ones who are suffering the casualties, and the Americans are losing nothing. They are giving the weapons, but not free. Ukraine has to pay for it. And the Russians are not going to give up. That part is very, very clear. Gentlemen, now what happens next? Europe has got umpteen problems. As I have told you, the French had thought they were like the frog who wanted to become the lion and finally blew himself up, and the French are nowhere now. And they are one of the has-been empires at one time. The only country which is economically strong is Germany, and the Germans are the only ones which are taking the Russian oil. At the same time, they are also scared of the Russians because they remember the licking they got in the Second World War when massive columns of tanks of the Germans, the Wehrmacht, were destroyed in the famous battles in Ukraine itself. When Kiev was taken and retaken, and all these Kharkiv was taken and retaken, they were some of the biggest tank battles ever to take place in world history. Europe also is facing a demographic crunch. And I don't think the Europeans have really realized that this NATO, which they were banking on, is a paper tiger. Nothing has convinced me that NATO can intervene anywhere and win the war. No way. For the simple reason they haven't fought a war for 78 years. The army is absolutely lackadaisical, easygoing, doesn't want to get into the thing, and they are in a terrible situation. And we now come to a situation, where we feel that what's going to happen is going to happen, and that inevitability is a third world war. If you look at this history of the last two world wars, the First World War and the Second World War, the scenario is something similar. Total miscalculations, and one mistake to another till there was the Holocaust. Now, the Russians are not going to give up, as I have told you, but there has to be an end if there is a beginning, and the end is approaching in my view, because Europe, in my view, is getting tired of fighting this war, and many of the European countries would like to wash their hands off Ukraine. The French and the British are finished as a world power. They're nowhere, and they're riding piggyback on the American horse. So that is not going to help them. And England also knows that it is not a force in the world at all. And one is a reminder of the famous quotation of Nikita Khrushchev, the first secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, who had said, "I need just 5 to 6 H-bombs and England cease to exist on the world map. I'll add a little more. A few bombs on Holland, Belgium, Hungary, all these, Poland, Finland, and they will cease to exist, these countries. They are having a false sense of security with NATO. NATO is going to do nothing, and it has not done anything so far." NATO is again miscalculating badly. It is thinking that it can prolong the Ukraine war. Prolong it so that at some stage, maybe 2 years, 3 years, and the Russians are exhausted and they say, "Okay, we give up." It's not going to happen like that, gentlemen, because the war is not going to last 2 to 3 years, and at some stage, Putin may decide that the time has come for him to launch Armageddon. And that's where the Bible comes in. And now I am pretty sure that Europe is heading for destruction. It's so silly, really. I remember, reading a Norse myth where the god Loki was punished, and he was put under a serpent which would drip poison on his head so that he could be tortured, and his wife would stand close by with a cup till the poison was filled, take it away, throw it and come back and get ready for the next step. Gentlemen, this is precisely what is happening in Europe. The poison is dripping and the Americans and the EU are holding a cup, and trying to throw the poison away and come back for more. And how long are they going to do it? It's not for long. Europe is facing a demographic crunch. The young men are not available. The women are not able to conceive. They are not fertile. For whatever reason, I won't go into that. But the fact is their birth rate is much below the one to sustain a population. And the net result is they have taken on the onus of fighting in Ukraine, a war which they cannot win. The Russians are used to long battles of attrition. You shouldn't forget that Napoleon advanced into Russia 1,200 miles and the Russians retreated for months together in 1812. And what happened? Ultimately, Napoleon lost 500,000 men of the Grand Army, and that sealed his future. He was doomed after that. So the same thing is going to happen here. I think the war will continue. The Russians are resilient and they know it's a question of life and death for them. And luckily for the Russians, the Chinese are not on the side of the Americans. They cannot be. And with India playing a neutral game, the Western world doesn't have the manpower to oppose Russia. That is the crux of the issue. The small armies, look at Finland, 23,000, some armies are 10,000. Do you think these armies or anything are going to oppose Russia in a conventional war? And in a nuclear war, they just cease to exist. Zelensky is the man who is the culprit. He's played into the hands of the Americans, and if at all he has to be, there is a war criminal, it's not Putin, it is Zelensky. He needs to be tried by the international tribunal. Gentlemen, I'll close now and say goodbye. And Jai Hind. God bless you all. Glory to India. Do subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and keep in mind that Ukraine is the tinderbox that's going to light World War III and the destruction of Western civilization. Bye-bye. God bless.